This podcast is created for farmers and powered by Pioneer Agronomy to bring you agronomic insights and proven solutions to fuel forward-thinking farming.
Welcome back to the Indiana Pioneer Agronomy podcast. I'm your host, Ben Jacob. This week, not joined by a co-host, but two rather unique guests for this program. We have Brad Burnett, who is a district lead in southeastern Iowa. Good morning, Brad.
Morning.
And we have Don Gehrls. And Don, I am actually not sure what your current title is, if you don't mind sharing with us.
Hey, yeah, good morning. I'm leading marketing excellence for the seeds business globally now, but I've spent a lot of time in the commercial business and the marketing side in the U.S. here the last few years.
Very good. So this week we're continuing our series on the Purdue football schedule. And, last week the Boilers actually managed to have what I'm going to say is an impressive win because they trounced the Illini. And this week we're up against Iowa. So both Brad and Don are in the state of Iowa, I believe, at this point. So they're going to be on. We're going to share, we're going to give our predictions again. I think I didn't go through and tally it up, but I think the Indiana Pioneer Agronomy podcast hosts are batting somewhere around 25% on success this year. So, we'll see if we can continue that just stellar trajectory. But to start with, we'll give a little bit of an update, as we always do, the crop condition and how harvest is progressing in the great state of Indiana. And I know we beat this horse a little bit hard. I don't have a ton to share over what we've covered in the past. Bean yields, early bean yields were phenomenal. We're starting to get into a little bit more corn across the state, and it looks to be pretty stellar as well. There are some pockets where obviously the drought stuck around longer than what we would have liked, and there are going to be a few challenging spots. But overall, I think we're sitting on a pretty decent corn crop. I made the comment probably 2 weeks ago, and I'm going to make it again. If you didn't plant Pioneer A-Series soybeans this year, you probably cost yourself money, at least in Indiana. So that's really the only crop update I'm going to give at this point. It's pretty good everywhere. We don't have the drowned out spots, and we had some challenges with wind, but overall, I think everybody's going to be pretty happy with the crop that they're setting on. So with that, we'll pivot a little bit. And maybe we'll start with Brad. Brad, if you don't mind, could you give us a little bit of an introduction? Tell us where exactly you're located and kind of how you came to do what you're doing today.
Sure, yeah. So Brad Burnett here. I'm a district sales lead for the Pioneer brand in Southeast Iowa. I'm a almost 20-year employee of all the brands that we've had, Corteva and DuPont and DuPont Pioneer. So I've been on the sales side and marketing side most of my career, family farm here outside of Iowa City. I've done the territory manager role. I've done some sales services roles. I've done a marketing role in Johnson. And for the past 8 sales seasons, I've been here in Southeast Iowa, managing a team of 10 employees, field agronomists and territory managers, as well as 52 independent Pioneer seed agencies.
Thank you, Brad. And Dawn, same format for you. Kind of tell us how you got to where you're at today and where exactly that is.
Yeah, no, I'm sitting in the Johnston, Iowa area at the Pioneer headquarters there. I've been with the company for 10 years as of yesterday, so I officially made it through that milestone. Done a variety of roles, but really the last 5 years I've spent in the marketing space, specifically on soybeans here in the U.S. Started out focused really in the Eastern Corn Belt for a couple years, and was working on it across the U.S. Nationally after that. But so I've spent a ton of time on the whole Enlist E3 trait adoption piece, and then obviously the Plenish piece, which I know has been important in Indiana.
Yes, definitely important. And if you're in an area where you were fortunate enough a couple of years ago to be part of that Plenish market, I mean that's a real differentiator both for the farmer and for the company. So, Brad, maybe if we can dive in a little bit deeper to your experience in that area over 20 years. Several different iterations of the company. What's the biggest change you've seen in agriculture over the past 20 years, you think?
You think about, the area we service here in Southeast Iowa. So it's like most areas, it's variable. We got some of the best ground in the world in our geography, and then we have, as you get further south along the Missouri border, it gets a little more challenging. Hard clay pan, not as much topsoil, just not as productive. So we obviously vary. But the thing I can see from the Pioneer standpoint, when I started back in the mid 2000s, Pioneer was right in the high of some 33 P67 P51s, kind of owned the marketplace here in my geography at M11s, M42s on the bean side. It seemed like we were definitely the market leader. Went through some challenging times there through the 34A20s and some of we call it the trait deficit years, where maybe we were trying to chase some of our competitors from a rootworm and just technology in general. But in my geography, we're on 6 years in a row of acre growth on both corn and beans. And it's really, you can really tell when Pioneer reinvested in corn and soybean research in those late 2000s, where we added some more research stations, added breeders. We're really starting to reap the rewards of that extra effort, especially in our geography. Our corn lineup is second to none. It's crazy to think that 5 years ago, if we were in a corn on corn or a trait comparison, we were nervous to have our AMXTs or maybe our CY products out there. Now, I mean, Chrome is winning pretty much the majority of the plots, both internally and externally. Just we're really in a much different space from a corn standpoint.
Yeah, very good. That investment in research is actually what brought me to the company. Years ago, I came in around 2010, and a research center in northern Indiana that was part of that increase in research investment. And the DP 4114 Chrome was one of the first projects there that really seemed to move the needle forward, and there was a lot of excitement. Very, very early on in my career, and I'm very fortunate for that. So with that performance you mentioned, Brad, I mean, as you look at this year, obviously there are challenges in every year and in every geography, but maybe for those of us in Indiana who maybe don't get out as much, maybe talk to us a little bit about the year that you've had. I know it sounds like you've got quite a bit of inherent variability just with the soils and the lay of the geography, but what's the growing season been like in southeastern Iowa?
It's wild. As I sit here today on, let's say, October 2nd, if you'd have asked me on August 2nd what I was expecting for yields, I definitely would have said we'll be below average. It's been extremely dry. We had a great spring. We had a 3-week window there starting about April 10th through the end of April where it was perfect conditions. Many operations, including my own family's operations, put the corn planter in the ground and pulled the bean planter out of the ground, having a delay in action. So it was a crazy 10 to 12 day run for most operations. Most operations got everything planted without any rain or any breaks in the action. Then we got a rain around May 5th. Which was a godsend for the early planted stuff. And for those that wasn't planted by May 5th, we didn't have any significant rainfall for 40 days after May 5th. We didn't get any rain in the rest of May and through the middle of June. So it was pretty crazy how dry it turned off. So everything planted before May 5th looked great. Got rooted down, got the moisture to get it going. Anything planted after May 5th really struggled. A lot of beans sat in dry dirt that just really didn't come up even until the end of May, early June. So tale of two worlds. But the benefit is most of our beans were planted prior to May 5th, so everything looked pretty good from that standpoint. And then the rest of the year, it's just been dry. If you look at the 20-year average, we're about 11 inches below average. So in Iowa, we tend to get anywhere from 20 to 25 inches of rain through the growing season on a normal year. This year we're sitting at anywhere from 8 to 10, which is pretty incredibly low in some areas. With some areas in that Cedar Rapids up through Waterloo, they're sitting at like 6 to 7 inches total for the growing season. So obviously great for root development in that June timeframe, but challenging from just the plant having the moisture that it needed to do its thing. But all things being said, like I started out 2 months ago, I would have really said that we're going to have a challenging year. We got just a little bit of rain around State Fair on August 14th in Iowa, a few other scattered showers. for those folks that caught those showers in August, they're having incredible yields. I mean, incredible, to the point where probably some of the best yields that some folks have ever experienced, both corn and beans. So to sit here at 10 inches of rain, anywhere from 10 to 15 below normal, and to have some of the best yields we've ever experienced, it's just wild to think about the genetics that we have today and what it can do with just-in-time rains. We never got extremely stressed, but I'm sure Don in Des Moines, I'm sure he didn't mow his grass much in July, August, or early at all.
Yeah, well, I like, selfishly, I like to keep my yard just this side of dead. I want it to have a little bit of green color to it, but I don't like to mow. So that's an ideal situation. If you're catching them timely and you can keep the crop growing, as an agronomist, that's great for me. So I don't have to mow. The corn can push on. So Don, I might be putting you on the spot a little bit with this question, but in your role, you touch basically the entire country. So what's your pulse on overall the status of the crop across the country?
Yeah, I mean, similar comments to Brad. It felt like at certain points in the year, especially in the middle of the summer, it was, yeah, this doesn't look great out here. And that was pretty widespread, it felt like. I mean, anybody can look at drought maps, even the last couple of years, right? And it doesn't look great, especially as you go west. But certain spots did catch some very timely rains just in time that have probably changed that outlook. It's not like that everywhere, though. I mean, if you get west enough, there's still some pockets where things don't look great. I think everybody can track, the yield prediction, good to excellent rating on the crop every week, and you kind of see how it bounces around. So it'll be pretty variable. I think we say that every year, though. But again, this is another one of those years. I felt like the last couple where you've got some folks who are saying they literally have the best crop they've ever had, and you got other folks who can't wait to move on from this year. So the drought piece, I think some of it you point to genetics though too, and there's some people who have thought, hey, this is going to be way below average and potentially one of my worst crops ever the last couple of years, and they end up getting through harvest and feeling like, yeah, it wasn't great, but I'm pretty amazed at how well the genetics stood up. So again, kind of a point back to just how far we've come in the last 10 years, both corn and beans, on what the crop can handle.
Yeah, I would agree with that assessment. I think the key word in there is variability in the rainfall events. I know as I watch storms coming across the plains towards Indiana, they break up and fall apart. And my family still owns a little bit of ground in southern Indiana, and I say a little bit. It's 3 miles from point to point. The farthest apart the fields are, and at one point this summer, we had 3 inches of rain on the north end of our farm and a 1/4 inch on the side out of one event. And it was like that everywhere. And as you get out and look at fields, you can see there's pockets even maybe just a half mile away where that rain that we thought saved everything, it came a week later in some instances. So there is some variability out there. There has to be everywhere. I watch those storms do the same thing basically across the entire country. But I think that, the sentiment, Brad, you talked about a month ago, I would go back, or I guess the beginning of August, that's more than a month ago. It's not September anymore, but I would go back and as I've talked to growers locally, ask how they felt about the crop in June. Because there were a lot of conversations in this area of the country about, do I even bother side dressing this? It's so burnt up. And, if we're going to stop managing it, my opinion is you don't plant it to begin with. But just your comment, Don, about the genetics and the tolerance to this stress and where we stand today, 10 years ago, that would not have been the case. I mean, if we're being honest with ourselves, the genetics were not there to have this sort of crop out of that much stress. So, it sounds like it's a very small world. Maybe the stress, maybe the challenges are unique mile to mile or state to state, but we've all had some sort of challenge this growing season. So with that, maybe we'll go ahead and pivot to the sports talk, which I'm very poorly suited to handle. But Purdue is playing Iowa this year, and as a Colts fan, which is a painful place to be as well as a Purdue football fan these days. But I know that the second best export out of Iowa outside of corn was a man named Bob Sanders, who came to the Colts and just absolutely destroyed everything, including his own body. So his career was short lived. But man, he was fun. He was fun to watch. And so, Don, I don't know exactly when you went through Iowa, but did you happen to be around in the Bob Sanders days?
I was just after him, but I mean, he was a big part of getting the program back on track because he was kind of part of that group right after Kirk Ferentz got to town. That I think they went 1-10 that first year, but then you had the Bob Sanders, Dallas Clark guys come through that really turned things around, and it's been a pretty good run since then. We've had our ups and downs, but that Bob, I think if you ask most Hawkeyes to look back on, some of their favorite players in the last couple of decades, I bet Bob Sanders is on the list for about everybody.
Yeah, I don't know how he couldn't be. He was a lot of fun to watch. And I forgot about Dallas Clark, but I've got a bunch of kids. I forget a lot of things. So, with that, as we've wrapped up all of these episodes, and Brad, I don't want to exclude you from our conversation before the podcast. You mentioned that you didn't know how much value you'd add to the sports talk, and I can assure you that it's every bit as much as what I can. So I'm going to ask you for a score prediction as well, but we'll start with Don, since he seems like he's got the best pulse on this situation. Purdue and Iowa both coming off wins last week. The game is at Iowa. So, Don, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I guess I'm filling the role of the sports guy since I'm the least agronomically sound person on this podcast today. So I got to find my spot. Look, Iowa is exactly who they were the last couple of years. Their defense is great, their special teams is great, and their offense is not good. So hopefully they find a way at home to just get the job done. But anybody who's thinking there's a lot of points, I think that's foolish to bet on. So I'm thinking 16-13, Iowa pulls it out. I'm assuming they score on defense, not offense, and just find a way to win.
16-13 for the Hawkeyes from Don. Brad, what are your thoughts?
Well, I was, initially thinking 17-13, Don. It was similar. They give up a touchdown and a couple field goals. That's about Iowa's MO. So the Vegas odds for this game is Purdue by 3.5, which is crazy to think that Iowa's 4-1, games at home. It's homecoming this week in Iowa City. So whether you want to admit it or not, that probably brings a little bit more energy to the game. Iowa is, they're a lockdown defensive team. It's just the challenge that Iowa has is our offense is so poor that our defense spends a lot of time on the field, and like anything, they just get worn out. And eventually, we have this bend don't break mentality, but sometimes when the things get wore out, they break. So we were able to. Iowa's a team that somehow finds ways to win. So I'm sure it's very frustrating when you play us. You think he got us beat, and then we return a punt for a touchdown like we had this Saturday to win the game, or we get a pick six at Iowa State to win the game. We always seem to find these random defensive or non-offensive scores that just gets us over the line. So I was thinking, Don said 17-13. I'll say 17-10. I think Iowa scores 2 and a field goal, and they give up a touchdown and a field goal. And how we get those 2 scores, it's anyone's guess.
Okay, well, since Carl couldn't join us, like I mentioned, he's the avid Boilermakers fan. He's coming in. He's a bit of a traitor in this case, but he's coming in with the Hawkeyes 21-18. So he's a little bit more optimistic on the offensive output than either one of you are. But I'm gonna have to. I'm gonna fall back on, since I don't know what I'm doing, I can go ahead and say that the Boilermakers are going to win, and I'm going to say 17-14 for the Boilermakers. So, again, I wouldn't go out and adjust your FanDuel bets on that. Maybe not on any of these, but it's all in good fun. Well, guys, I appreciate both of you taking the time to sit down with us this morning. It's it's a fun conversation to have, and it's a good way to get to know more parts of the organization and have a better understanding of what this crop looks like across the country. But before I let you go, is there any closing comments you guys would like to make?
I'll go first, Don. I mean, obviously the Pioneer brand, I mean, obviously we're founded in Iowa in the mid-20s, 1920. So it's a very strong brand for us in Iowa. We're very fortunate to have the corporate offices in Johnson supporting us here locally, but our product performance is seriously, it's stellar. And our sales reps and customers are very excited about the Pioneer momentum. We haven't talked a whole lot about A series, but holy smokes, the 30 A75s, the 28 A65s, we got a whole new lineup of A series beans that are beating existing varieties that we were really excited about, and now we're rolling into a whole new set this coming year. I think the ceiling is unlimited for our bean lineup with Pioneer brand.
Yeah, and thanks for having us, Ben. This has been fun. Look, I've been at the company for 10 years, not as long as Brad, but I haven't seen this type of enthusiasm for the product performance like I've seen the last couple of years. It's kind of building towards this, and you start looking at the pipeline just in terms of genetics especially, but some traits coming too. And you can see why there's a lot of folks, jumping on the bandwagon with Pioneer. It'll be fun. We've got 100-year anniversary coming up in a couple of years here. So it's kind of like everything's coming together here at that anniversary time and looking really good for the next 100 after that. But thanks for having us today.
Yeah, well, thanks again, Brad and Don, for coming on, and thanks for the plug at the end about our performance. I mentioned it earlier on, the bean performance has been just outstanding. And if you'd have told a lot of the guys in Southern Indiana, you mentioned 28 A65s, Brad, we've got 90 bushel field averages across the scale cut in mid-September. I mean, if you'd have told anybody 10 years ago they'd be cutting 90 bushel beans in September, or really at any time of the year, they probably would have institutionalized you. So yields are just outstanding, and to hear that performance is spread across the country just speaks to the stability of those products as well. So, well, thanks again for joining us. Thanks everybody for tuning in and listening. If you wanted to reach out, you have ideas for topics or have questions that you want to ask, as always, you can find me in the Twitter sphere, or on X now, I guess, at the Ben Jacob, or on Facebook at Ben Jacob Agronomy. Thanks again, and stay safe.
Thank you for listening to this episode from the Pioneer Agronomy team. Be sure to visit pioneer.com/podcasts to access additional episodes and learn more about our extensive on-farm data and innovative digital tools that are fueling forward-thinking farming.